The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched upward like the inside of a cathedral made from living crystal. Light bent and shifted through walls that had stood for 10,000 years, casting rainbow shadows across the floor where Ambassador Kira Vance walked alone. Her boots echoed against stone that had been polished smooth by countless alien feet, and she kept her head high as she approached the Circle of Thrones. 12 species ruled this galaxy. 12 ancient civilizations that had crawled from their birth worlds, conquered the stars, and decided long ago that they would choose who else could join them. They sat above her now on seats carved from materials humanity had no names for. Looking down with eyes that held nothing but contempt, Kira had expected this. She had prepared for it her entire career. But standing here, feeling the weight of their judgment pressing against her chest, she understood for the first time what it truly meant to be considered lesser. High Arbiter Zelthos rose from his throne. He was tall, nearly 3 meters, with a body covered in dark plates that clicked against each other when he moved. His face was a nightmare of mandibles and compound eyes, and his voice came out like metal scraping against metal. The translator in Kira's ear turned it into cold, precise words. The human delegation will hear the charges against their species. Kira clasped her hands behind her back. We are listening, High Arbiter, Zelthos gestured, and a holographic display bloomed in the center of the chamber. It showed star maps, documents, images of ships and weapons that humanity had built in secret. Violation of Directive 7. Humanity has established colonies on 14 worlds designated as protected reserves. The display shifted. Violation of Directive 12. Humanity has constructed warships exceeding the tonnage limits assigned to junior species. Another shift. Violation of Directive 23. Humanity has developed weapons technology that was explicitly forbidden by this council. The images kept coming. Research stations hidden in asteroid fields. Shipyards buried inside hollowed moons. Laboratories where human scientists had pushed past every boundary the council had set. Kira watched it all without expression. They had known this day would come. They had planned for it. In total, Zelthos continued, humanity has violated 17 council directives. This is unprecedented. No species in the history of galactic civilization has shown such complete disregard for the laws that maintain peace and order among the stars. A murmur rippled through the other counselors. The Velnoxy trade minister looked uncomfortable. The Oravon representative was shaking her head slowly. But most of them stared at Kira with open hostility, so she personally had committed every crime. Zelthos let the silence stretch before speaking again. The council has reached a unanimous verdict. Humanity will dismantle its unauthorized fleet. Humanity will abandon its illegal colonies. Humanity will surrender all forbidden weapons technology to council inspectors. His mandibles clicked with satisfaction. And humanity will submit to re-education protocols to correct the defective cultural patterns that led to these violations. Re-education. Kira knew what that meant. She had seen what remained of species that had undergone the council's correction programs. Empty husks that obeyed every order and never questioned anything again. The human delegation has 1 solar cycle to accept these terms, as Zelthos said. Failure to comply will result in enforcement action. The Galactic Armada stands ready to carry out the Council's will. He sat back on his throne, clearly expecting Kira to beg, to plead for mercy, to do what every other junior species had done when faced with the might of the 12 ancient powers. Instead, Kira smiled. It was a small expression, barely a curve of her lips, but it sent a visible shudder through several counselors. Humans had a reputation for that smile. It meant something different than it did for other species. It meant that the person wearing it had stopped being afraid and started making plans. Hi, Arbiter, Kira said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. I have listened to your charges with great interest. And on behalf of the United Human Confederacy, I have a response. She paused, looking around at each of the 12 thrones. Meeting every alien gaze without flinching, we decline. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. For a moment, Kira wondered if the translator had malfunctioned, If perhaps she had said something else by accident, then the chamber exploded into chaos. Counselors leaped from their seats, shouting in languages the translator could barely keep up with. Zelthos slammed his armored fist against his throne, the impact echoing like thunder. The Mirathi war chief was already calling for immediate military action. Kira stood in the center of the storm, calm as a stone in a river. When Zelthos finally restored order, his voice had lost all pretense of diplomatic courtesy. You cannot decline, human. This is not a negotiation. This is a verdict. You will comply, or you will be destroyed. Will we? Kira tilted her head slightly. Your armada numbers? What? 100,000 ships? 200,000? Impressive numbers. But I wonder, High Arbiter, have you ever asked yourself why humanity built what we built? Have you considered that perhaps we saw this moment coming from the very beginning? You have 300 vessels, Zelthos spat. Your entire species could not withstand a single attack wing of the Enforcement Armada. 300 vessels that you know about, Kira corrected. 300 vessels that we allowed you to see? She turned and began walking toward the exit. We have tried, for 50 years, to be good members of your community. We followed your rules. We accepted your insults. We watched you treat us as children while species half our age received full rights. Simply because they knew how to kneel properly. She stopped at the door and looked back. But humans do not kneel, High Arbiter. We never have. When we face impossible odds, we do not surrender. We adapt. We build. We prepare. Her smile returned, sharper than before. You have given us one solar cycle to comply. I suggest you use that time wisely. Enjoy it, in fact. It will be the last cycle you spend feeling superior. She walked out, and the doors closed behind her with a sound like a tomb ceiling shut. That night, every human colony in the galaxy went dark. Transmissions ceased mid-sentence. Ships vanished from their ports. Stations that had been bustling with activity fell silent. Their lights going out one by one like stars dying, council patrols rushed to investigate, expecting to find desperate refugees fleeing toward the galactic rim. They found nothing. Empty habitats, abandoned equipment, personal belongings left behind as though their owners had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. 12 billion humans disappeared in a single night. Zelthos stood in the council chamber, staring at reports that made no sense. Find them, he ordered. Search every system, every asteroid, every moon. They cannot have gone far. But the searches found nothing. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. Humanity had become a ghost, a memory, a warning that faded into legend. Most of the council convinced themselves that the humans had fled in terror, or perhaps destroyed themselves rather than face judgment. It was easier to believe that than to consider the alternative. But late at night, when the council chamber was empty and the crystal walls whispered with ancient echoes, Zelthos sometimes remembered the way Kira Vance had smiled, and he wondered what she had meant when she said they had built what they built. He told himself it did not matter. Humanity was gone. The galaxy would forget they had ever existed. He was wrong. 10 years after the humans vanished, the council declared them officially extinct. There was a ceremony, brief and formal, where Zelthos announced that the human threat had been neutralized without the need for military action. The junior species had simply collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance, he explained. Let this be a lesson to any who might consider defying galactic law. The 12 ancient powers celebrated. Trade routes that humans had established were divided among the victors. Their abandoned colonies were claimed and repurposed. Everything they had built was picked apart, studied, and ultimately dismissed as primitive. Life in the galaxy continued, as it always had, but not everyone was satisfied with the official. Story Counselor Yemeth of the Oravon Collective was an old woman by her species standards. Her blue-scaled skin faded to pale silver with age. She had spent her career studying extinction events, cataloging the dozens of species that had risen and fallen under council rule. And something about the human disappearance bothered her deeply. "We never found bodies," she said during a private meeting with the other counselors. "When the Thesari resisted, we found wreckage for centuries. When the Mordain fled, we tracked their ships to the galactic edge and watched them die in the void. But the humans left nothing. 12 billion individuals do not simply evaporate." Zelthos waved a dismissive claw. "They destroyed themselves. Mass suicide? Perhaps? Or they fled into uncharted space and perished. The result is the same, is it?" Yemeth pulled up her research files. Before they vanished, human scientists were asking questions. Strange questions. They wanted access to our archives on dimensional theory. They requested data on dark matter harvesting techniques that even we consider theoretical. They were building something, Zelthos. Something we never found. "Primitives playing with concepts beyond their understanding," the High Arbiter replied. "Whatever they were attempting clearly failed." Yemeth looked at him for a long moment. "I hope you are right," she said quietly. "For all our sakes, I truly hope you are right." 20 years passed. Then 30. The humans became a footnote in galactic history. It's mentioned occasionally as an example of what happened to species that forgot their place. Young students learned about them in academy courses, shaking their heads at the foolishness of a people who thought they could challenge powers that had ruled for millennia. But some species remembered differently. The Valnoxi were traders, merchants who valued information above all else. They had always been friendly with humans, finding them reliable partners who honored their contracts and paid their debts on time. When the disappearance happened, several Valnoxi merchants had been in the middle of negotiations with human companies. One of these merchants, a Greyford elder named Thesic, kept a private record of his final meeting with a human diplomat named Marcus Webb. It had taken place just 3 days before the vanishing, in a small bar on a neutral station. "You know what is coming," Thesic had said. "The Council will crush you. They have done it before." Marcus had been drinking something amber-colored, swirling it in his glass while he smiled. Not the desperate smile of a doomed man, Thesic noted in his record, but the calm smile of someone who knew something others did not. "Oh, maybe," Marcus had replied. "Or maybe we have been preparing for this moment since the day we first made contact." "Preparing how? Your fleet is nothing compared to theirs." "True." Marcus had taken a long drink. "Tell me, Thesic, do you know what makes humans different from other species? It is not our strength, or our numbers, or our technology. It is our patience. When we face a problem we cannot solve, we do not give up. We disappear into our workshops, and we work on it until we find an answer." Thesic had leaned forward. "What are you building, Marcus?" The human had winked, an expression Thesic still did not fully understand even decades later. "Something patient," Marcus had said. "Something that will make the Council wish they had been kinder to us." Then he had finished his drink, paid for both of them, and walked away into the crowd. Thesic never saw him again. 50 years after the vanishing, strange things began to happen at the edges of explored space. A Mirathi patrol ship reported gravitational anomalies near an uninhabited system. Their sensors detected something massive moving through deep space. But when they investigated, they found nothing but empty void. The crew was dismissed as unreliable. A Drathan, research vessel studying a dying star, recorded unusual energy signatures that matched no known phenomenon. The data was labeled as equipment malfunction and filed away. An Auravon colony on the galactic rim reported seeing lights in the sky that moved against the rotation of the stars. The colonists were told they had witnessed a meteor shower, but the reports kept coming. Always at the edges. Always brief. Always unexplained. Yemeth, now ancient and mostly retired, compiled these reports in her private files. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone willing to look. Something was out there. Something that did not want to be seen. She requested a meeting with Zelthos, but he refused. The High Arbiter had grown comfortable in his power, secure in his belief that the galaxy was exactly as he understood it. He had no time for the paranoid fantasies of an old woman. 70 years passed. Then 80, the Council grew fat and lazy. Without any serious challenges to their authority, they turned their attention inward, squabbling over trade disputes and territorial boundaries. The Enforcement Armada, once the most feared military force in existence, became a ceremonial fleet, its ships maintained but rarely used. Some of the younger species, those who had joined the galactic community after the human disappearance, did not even believe the stories. Humans became a myth, a legend used to frighten children. Do not challenge the council, parents would say, or you will vanish like the humans did. But in the darkness between stars, something was moving in a place that no council sensor could reach. Humanity had built a new home. Not on a planet or a station, but in the folded spaces between dimensions, where time moved differently and the laws of physics could be bent by those who understood them. For 100 years, they had worked. They had innovated. They had transformed themselves from a desperate refugee species into something the galaxy had never seen before. Every scientist, every engineer, every creative mind in their civilization had been focused on a single goal: ensuring that when humanity returned, they would never be threatened again. They built ships that could cross the galaxy in hours instead of months. They developed weapons that did not destroy, but convinced. They created technology so advanced that the Council's greatest achievements looked like children's toys in comparison. And through it all, they waited. Commander Thesa Okonkwo was born 50 years after the vanishing. In a generation that had never seen the stars of their homeworld, she had grown up on stories of Earth, of blue skies and green forests and oceans that stretched beyond sight. But she had also grown up with purpose. Every human child learned the history. Every human child understood why they were hiding and what they were preparing for. On the 100th anniversary of the vanishing, Thesis stood on the bridge of the UHS Perseverance, the flagship of a fleet that numbered 3,000 vessels. Each ship was larger than anything the Council had ever built. Each one carried technology that would have seemed like magic to the civilizations that had tried to erase humanity from existence. Commander, her second officer reported, all ships are in position. The fleet is ready. Thesa looked out at the assembled armada, at the culmination of a century of work and sacrifice. Somewhere out there, an arrogant insectoid sat on a crystal throne, believing he had one. He was about to learn otherwise. Open a channel to all ships, Thesa ordered. Her voice was steady, but inside her heart was pounding. This was the moment their grandparents had dreamed of. This was why they had endured. Attention all vessels. This is Commander Okonkwo. 100 years ago, the Galactic Council told humanity to kneel. Our ancestors chose to disappear instead. They chose to build. They chose to wait. She paused, letting the words sink in. The waiting is over. Today, we go home. Today, we show the galaxy what patience can create. The fleet began to move. Sliding through dimensions like shadows through water, the Council had forgotten about humanity. They were about to remember. The first sign came at the Mirathi border station, a small outpost positioned at the edge of Council space where young officers served their mandatory tours and dreamed of more exciting assignments. Lieutenant Verax was monitoring the sensor array when the alarms started screaming. Gravitational anomaly detected, the computer announced in its flat mechanical voice. Source unknown. Magnitude exceeds measurable parameters. Verax stared at his screen, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The instruments were showing something massive approaching, something so large that it was bending space itself. But there was nothing on the visual scanners. Nothing at all. Agnostic, his commander ordered. The equipment must be malfunctioning. The diagnostic came back clean. The sensors were working perfectly. Then the stars began to flicker. Verax had grown up watching the night sky, learning to navigate by the patterns of distant suns that had burned for billions of years. He knew those patterns like he knew his own heartbeat. So when 3 stars on the far edge of his visual field blinked out for just a moment, he felt his blood turn cold. Commander, he whispered, something just passed between us and the Trilax system.
That is impossible.
There is nothing out there large enough to block starlight. But even as the commander spoke, more stars flickered. A whole section of the sky went dark, then returned, then went dark again. Something was moving out there. Something impossibly vast. The first ship emerged from folded space without warning. It did not arrive the way normal vessels did, with the familiar flash of dimensional drives. Instead, it simply appeared, unfolding from nothing like a flower blooming in fast motion. The hull was dark, almost black, drinking in the light from nearby stars. And it was enormous. The Mirathi station, which had always seemed impressively large to its crew, could have fit inside this vessel's smallest hangar bay. Verax opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Then the second ship appeared, and the third, and the 10th, and the 100th. They kept coming, sliding out of dimensions that should not have existed, filling the void with their silent, terrible presence. The Mirathi sensors gave up trying to count them, displaying only error messages and increasingly desperate warnings. When the emergence finally stopped, 3,000 human ships hung in the darkness. They formed a perfect geometric pattern, each vessel precisely positioned in relation to the others. No engine glow betrayed their presence. No running lights marked their hulls. They simply existed, patient and still, waiting. The commander finally found his voice. Send a message to Council High Command. Priority absolute. Tell them, he paused, struggling to find words adequate to describe what he was seeing. Tell them the humans have returned. The message reached the council chamber in minutes, transmitted across the instantaneous communication network that linked all of galactic civilization. High Arbiter Zelthos was in the middle of a routine session when his aide rushed in, mandibles clicking in barely controlled panic. What is the meaning of this interruption? The aide held up a data tablet with shaking hands. High Arbiter, you need to see this. The holographic display in the center of the chamber activated, showing the sensor feed from the Mirathi station. The assembled counselors stared in disbelief at the wall of ships that filled the screen. That is impossible, the Orovon representative said. The humans are extinct. They have been extinct for a century. Apparently not, Zelthos replied, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. He was staring at the display, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he believed about the universe. The ships were too large. The technology was too advanced. Nothing about this made sense. More reports flooded in as the human fleet began to move. They crossed the Mirathi border without slowing, ignoring the frantic hails from the outpost. They passed through the Vonoxy trade routes, their presence causing merchant vessels to scatter like frightened fish. They moved toward the heart of council space with the steady, unstoppable patience of a glacier grinding through mountains. On the bridge of the Perseverance, Commander Thiza Okonkwo watched the panicked transmissions with quiet satisfaction. A century of preparation, a century of sacrifice. And now, finally, the galaxy would understand what humanity had become. Commander, her communications officer reported, we are receiving hails on all frequencies. The Council is demanding to know our intentions. Let them demand, Thesa replied. We will speak when we are ready, and not a moment before. The Enforcement Armada is mobilizing. Current estimates suggest they will have a full battle fleet assembled within 6 hours. Thesa nodded. She had expected this. Continue our approach. Maintain formation. And make sure every ship in the galaxy can see us coming. The human fleet moved through council space like a dark tide rolling across a beach. Planets that had never seen a human face watched the massive vessels pass overhead, their shadows falling across cities and farmlands. Orbital stations that had monitored the sky for centuries found their sensors, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what they were witnessing. And still, the humans did not speak. This was deliberate. Thesa understood the power of silence better than most. When you spoke, you gave your enemy information, revealed your intentions, your weaknesses, your fears. But when you remained silent, you became a mystery, a threat that could not be measured or understood. The Council was used to dealing with species that begged and pleaded and negotiated. They had protocols for that. They had procedures. But they had no protocol for an enemy that simply appeared and refused to explain itself. On the Council homeworld, chaos was spreading. Citizens who had never known war scrambled to understand what was happening. Military officers who had spent their careers attending ceremonies and writing Reports suddenly found themselves preparing for actual combat. Politicians who had built their power on the assumption that the old order would last forever watched their certainties crumble. Zelthos stood in the council chamber, watching the tactical display as the human fleet advanced. He had ruled this galaxy for 3 centuries. He had crushed rebellions and eliminated threats, and maintained the peace that the 12 ancient powers had built over millennia. And he had done it all with the absolute confidence that he understood how the universe worked. Now that confidence was shattered. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Where did they get this technology? How did they hide for so long?" No one had answers. The truth was that the Council had never truly understood humanity. They had seen humans as primitives, upstarts who needed to be controlled before they became dangerous. They had never considered that humanity might be capable of something like this. Counselor Yemeth, ancient and frail, was the only one who did not seem surprised. She sat in her seat with a strange expression on her face, something between vindication and sorrow. "I warned you," she said softly. "I told you we never found bodies. I told you they were building something, but you would not listen." Zelthos turned on her, mandibles clicking with fury. "You knew about this?" "I suspected. For decades, I suspected." She looked at the display, at the massive ships that were now less than a day away from the sacred world of Thyros. "They asked us about dimensional theory, about dark matter harvesting. We laughed at them. We called them primitives. And then we gave them 100 years to figure it out on their own." The chamber fell silent. Everyone was staring at the old woman, understanding slowly dawning on their faces. 100 years, Yemeth repeated. "Do you know what a determined species can accomplish in 100 years? Zelthos. They can transform themselves. They can become something entirely new. And if they are angry enough, patient enough, and clever enough." She gestured at the display. "They can come back and make you regret every cruel word you ever spoke." Zelthos wanted to argue. He wanted to insist that the enforcement armada would handle this, that Council's superiority would prevail as it always had. But looking at those ships, at the technology that should not exist, he felt something he had not experienced in 300 years of life. He felt afraid. Commander Okonkwo received the report that the Council armada was assembling above Thyros. 120,000 ships, everything the 12 ancient powers could muster on short notice. It was an impressive number. It would not be enough. "Set course for Thyros," she ordered. "It is time to show them what a century of spite can build." The sacred world of Thyros hung in space like a jewel, its surface covered in temples and monuments that dated back to the founding of galactic civilization. This was where the 12 ancient powers had signed their first treaties. This was where the Council had been born. For 10,000 years, no hostile force had ever threatened this place. Today, that would change. High Admiral Vesk commanded the enforcement armada from the bridge of his flagship, the Righteous Judgment. He was a veteran of 100 engagements, a warrior who had earned his rank through skill and courage. But as he watched the human fleet approach, he felt none of the confidence that had carried him through previous battles. 120,000. Ships surrounded Thyros in defensive formation. Destroyers, cruisers, dreadnoughts, carriers, every class of vessel the Council possessed. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. And yet, looking at the dark shapes of the human armada, Vesk could not shake the feeling that it would not matter. The human ships stopped at the edge of weapons range. 3,000 vessels against 120,000. By any reasonable calculation, the odds should have been overwhelmingly in the Council's favor, but nothing about this situation was reasonable. "Open a channel," Vesk ordered. His voice was steady, but his hands were gripping his command chair hard enough to leave marks. "Human vessels, you are in violation of galactic law. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. This is your only warning." For a long moment, there was no response. The human fleet simply hung there, silent and still, like predators waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Vesk was about to repeat his demand when the communication system crackled to life. A human face appeared on the screen. A woman with dark skin and gray hair, her expression calm, almost peaceful. She wore a uniform that Vesk did not recognize, decorated with symbols that meant nothing to him. "Admiral Vesk," she said. Her voice carried no anger, no fear, no urgency. She spoke like someone discussing the weather. "My name is Thesa Okonkwo, commander of the Human Reclamation Fleet. I have a message for you and for the council you serve." Vesk straightened in his chair. "Deliver your message, human. Then surrender your ships." Okonkwo smiled slightly. It was a gentle expression, almost sad. 100 years ago, your council gave humanity an ultimatum: heal or be destroyed. We chose a third option. We disappeared. We built. We learned. We became something you cannot comprehend. "Pretty words will not save you," Vesk replied. "You are outnumbered 40 to 1. Whatever technology you have developed, it cannot overcome those odds." "You are correct that technology alone cannot win battles," Okonkwo agreed. "But that assumes we came here to fight a battle. We did not." She leaned forward slightly. "We came here to deliver a lesson." Before Vesk could respond, the human ships began to hum. It was not a sound that traveled through space. It was something else entirely. A vibration that seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly in his bones. The crew of the Righteous Judgment grabbed their consoles as the sensation grew stronger, spreading through every system on the ship. "What is happening?" Vesk demanded. "Report." His tactical officer was staring at her screen with wide eyes. "Admiral, I am detecting some kind of harmonic pulse emanating from the human fleet. It is affecting our systems. Navigation is unresponsive. Weapons are offline. Engines are." She paused, checking her readings twice. "Engines are shutting down." Vesk turned to look out the main viewport. All around him, the lights of the enforcement armada were flickering. Ships that had been maintaining formation were beginning to drift, their engines going dark one by one. Across the entire fleet, 120,000 vessels were falling silent. "What did you do?" he breathed. On the screen, Okonkwo's expression had not changed. "We learned to speak to machines, Admiral, not through commands or code, but through something deeper. We spent a century studying the fundamental frequencies that govern all technology, and we taught our ships to sing in a voice that convinces other systems to sleep." Vesk stabbed at his console, trying to restore power, trying to send a signal, trying to do anything. Nothing responded. The Righteous Judgment was dead, drifting helplessly in the void. "You have not been harmed," Okonkwo continued. "Life support remains active on all your vessels. Your crews are safe. In a few hours, your systems will wake up on their own, and you will be free to leave." She paused. "We could have destroyed you. Every ship, every station, every world that supported the council that tried to erase us. We have weapons that make your most powerful dreadnoughts look like children's toys. But that is not why we came back." She stood up from her chair, and the camera followed her as she walked to the viewport of her own bridge. Behind her, through the transparent wall, Vesk could see the paralyzed council fleet. 120,000 ships, floating helplessly like leaves in a still pond. Not to the council, not to the galaxy, to ourselves. We wanted to know if 100 years of anger had made us into monsters. If we would use our power to take revenge on those who had wronged us. She turned back to face the camera. We are not monsters, Admiral. We are human. And humans do not define themselves by the cruelty of their enemies. We define ourselves by the choices we make when we have the power to choose. The communication channel widened, broadcasting not just to Vesk, but to every ship in the fleet, every station in the system, every receiver capable of picking up the signal. Okonkwo's voice carried across council space, reaching billions of ears on thousands of worlds. "People of the galaxy," she said. 100 years ago, the council told you that humanity was a threat. They said we were dangerous, uncontrollable, a species that needed to be corrected or eliminated. She spread her arms, indicating the helpless armada floating around her fleet. "Look at what we could do. Look at the power we have built. And then ask yourselves a question. If humanity wanted to destroy you, would you still be alive to hear this message?" She let the question hang in the silence of space. "The council is dissolved," she continued, "not by force, but by demonstration of their irrelevance. Any species can rule through fear. Any tyrant can maintain control by threatening violence. But true civilization it's built on something else. Trust. Cooperation. The recognition that different species can live together without one dominating all the others." On the bridge of the righteous judgment, Vesk listened in stunned silence. He had prepared himself for battle, for destruction, the kind of brutal warfare that had defined galactic history for millennia. He had not prepared for this. "Humanity's not here to rule you," Okonkwo said. "We are not here to replace one tyranny with another. We are here to offer an alternative. A galaxy where no species is told they are lesser because they are younger or different, or because older powers fear what they might become. A galaxy where conflicts are resolved through understanding rather than conquest." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "We know this will be difficult. We know that many of you fear us, and perhaps you should. We have spent a century building the power to destroy anyone who threatens us. But power without wisdom is just violence. And wisdom begins with the courage to show mercy when mercy is not expected." The human fleet began to move, gliding through the paralyzed armada without firing a single shot. They passed within meters of council warships, close enough to touch, demonstrating their complete control of the situation. "You have one solar cycle to respond," Okonkwo concluded. "Not with weapons. Not with threats. With words. The council chamber on Thyros remains intact. We will be waiting there to discuss the future. Any species that wishes to participate in building something better is welcome to join us." The transmission ended. The human ships continued their silent procession. Heading toward the planet below, Admiral Vesk sat in the darkness of his dead bridge, surrounded by the largest military force in galactic history, and realized that everything he had believed about power and strength had been wrong. The humans had won without firing a shot, and somehow, that was more terrifying than any weapon could have been. The council chamber on Theros had stood empty for 3 days. The crystal walls that had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic history now reflected only silence, their rainbow light falling on abandoned thrones and dusty floors. Outside, the massive shapes of human vessels hung in orbit, patient and still waiting. On the 4th day, the first delegates arrived. The Velnoxi came first, their trade minister walking into the chamber with the careful steps of someone entering a sacred space. Behind her came a small group of advisors, their gray fur bristling with nervous energy. They had always been friendly with humans, and they hoped that history would count for something. The Drathan scholars arrived next, curious despite their fear. They had spent a century wondering what had happened to humanity, and now they would finally learn the truth. Their delegation included some of the finest minds in their civilization, beings who had dedicated their lives to understanding the universe and everything in it. More species followed. Some came with warships, positioning their fleets at what they believed was a safe distance. Others came with nothing but hope, small delegations from minor species who had never had a voice in council proceedings. They came because humanity had promised something different, and even the possibility of change was worth the risk. High Arbiter Zelthos was the last to arrive. He walked alone, without guards or advisors. His dark plates were dull, his movements slow. In 3 days, Everything he had built over 3 centuries had crumbled to dust. The species he had ruled no longer answered his calls. The armada he had commanded was still drifting helplessly above Thyros, waiting for its systems to wake. He was not a ruler anymore. He was not even a counselor. He was simply old and tired and broken. The chamber had been rearranged. The 12 thrones that had dominated the space were gone, replaced by a simple circular table with seats for anyone who wished to participate. At the center of the table sat 2 humans. One was Commander Okonkwo, still wearing her military uniform, her expression calm and unreadable. The other was an elderly woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. Ambassador Kira Vance had aged considerably in the past century. Her face was lined, her hands spotted with age. But when she saw Zelthos enter the chamber, she smiled the same smile she had worn 100 years ago. When she had walked out of this very room and disappeared into legend, "Hi, Arbiter," she said, gesturing to an empty seat. "Please, join us." Zelthos hesitated. He had expected many things from this moment. Accusations, demands, perhaps even execution. He had not expected courtesy. Slowly, he walked to the table and sat down. His compound eyes swept across the assembled delegates, seeing fear and hope and curiosity in equal measure. Then he looked at Kira Vance, the human who had started all of this with 2 simple words. "You won," he said. His translator rendered the words flat and emotionless, but everyone could hear the defeat in his voice. "What do you want from us?" Kira leaned forward, resting her arms on the table. "I want to tell you a story, Zelthos. Will you listen?" He nodded, too exhausted to argue. 100 years ago, I stood in this chamber and heard you pronounce judgment on my species. You called us primitives, vermin, a mistake of evolution that needed to be corrected. You told us to kneel or be destroyed." She paused, her eyes never leaving his face. "Do you remember what I said in response?" "You declined," Zelthos replied. "Then you disappeared." "Yes, we disappeared into the darkness between stars, and we built. We've built ships and weapons and technology that your scientists still cannot explain. We built a civilization that could have crushed yours without effort." She smiled slightly. "And do you know what else we built?" Zelthos shook his head. "Restraint," Kira said. "We built the wisdom to know that power without mercy is just tyranny wearing different clothes. We built the understanding that becoming what we hated would be the greatest defeat of all." She reached across the table, her old hand extending toward him. "We could have burned everything. Every council world, every ancient power, every species that stood against us. We chose not to. That is the lesson, Arbiter. That is what separates civilization from barbarism." The chamber was completely silent. Every delegate was watching, barely breathing, waiting to see what would happen next. "You tried to erase us," Kira continued. "You called us lesser because we were young, because we were different, because we did not fit into your understanding of how the galaxy should work. And do you know what we did in response? We proved you wrong. Not by destroying you, but by showing you a better way." She withdrew her hand, leaning back in her chair. "The council is finished. The old order is dead. What comes next is up to all of us." She looked around the table at the assembled delegates. "Humanity is not interested in ruling this galaxy. We never were. We just wanted to be treated as equals, to have a voice in our own future. That is what we are offering to everyone in this room. Not submission to a new master, but partnership, cooperation. A chance to build something that works for everyone, not just the powerful." The Velnoxy trade minister spoke up, her voice hesitant. "How can we trust you? You have demonstrated power beyond anything we have ever seen. What guarantee do we have that you will not use it against us?" Commander Okonkwo answered. "You have no guarantee. Trust cannot be demanded. It must be earned over time, through action. We understand that. We are prepared to demonstrate our good faith however we can." Another delegate asked, "If we reject your offer, then you are free to leave," Okonkwo replied. "We will not stop you. We will not threaten you. We will not take revenge. You will go back to your worlds and live your lives, and we will hope that someday you change your mind." The delegates looked at each other, struggling to process what they were hearing. This was not how power worked. This was not how conquerors behaved. It went against everything they had learned in centuries of galactic politics. Zelshos was the first to speak again. His voice was quiet, almost broken. Why? After everything we did to you, everything we said, why show us mercy? Kira looked at him for a long moment. In her eyes, he could see echoes of the young ambassador who had stood in this chamber a century ago, defiant and unafraid. But he could also see something else. Something that looked almost like compassion. Because someone has to be first, she said. Someone has to choose kindness when cruelty would be easier. Someone has to prove that there is another way. She smiled, and this time there was no sharpness in it, only warmth. Our ancestors faced impossible odds 100 years ago. They could have surrendered. They could have fought and died. Instead, they did something much harder. They waited. They built. They became something better. If they could do that, then surely we can do this. She extended her hand again, this time waiting patiently for a response. Zelthos stared at her hand. In 300 years of life, he had never shown weakness to anyone. He had never admitted fault, never asked forgiveness, never acknowledged that he might have been wrong. His entire existence had been built on the certainty that he was superior, that his power gave him the right to judge others. That certainty was gone now. It had died the moment the human fleet appeared and showed him how small his power truly was. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her hand. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Delegates who had been watching with skepticism suddenly leaned forward, seeing possibility where they had only seen danger before. If Zelthos, the architect of human persecution, could accept this offer, then perhaps there was hope for everyone in the weeks that followed. The galaxy began to change. The enforcement armada systems woke up exactly as Okonkwo had promised, and the ships were allowed to return home without interference. The paralysis had left no lasting damage, but it had left something else. Every officer, every crew member, every soldier who had been helplessly at human mercy now knew the truth. Humanity could have destroyed them all. They had chosen not to. Old alliances crumbled as species realized they no longer needed to fear the Council's wrath. New partnerships formed as former rivals discovered common ground. The Velnoxi and the Drathon organized the first interspecies summit, inviting representatives from across the galaxy to discuss what came next. Humanity did not dominate these discussions. They participated as equals, offering their technology and knowledge freely to anyone who asked. They helped rebuild stations that had been damaged in the chaos. They shared medical advances that cured diseases that had plagued other species for millennia. They asked for nothing in return except the chance to be part of something larger than themselves. And slowly, grudgingly, the galaxy began to believe that this might actually work. Years later, historians would call it the Silent Century, the 100 years humanity spent in darkness preparing for a moment that changed everything. They would write about the technology and the strategy and the patience required to execute such a plan. But the Velnoxi historians, who had always understood humanity better than most, wrote about something else. They wrote about the choice. Humanity had built the power to dominate. They had earned the right to take revenge. They had been given every justification for cruelty that any species could ask for. And they had chosen mercy instead. That, the Velnoxi wrote, was what truly set humanity apart. Not their ships, not their weapons, not their technology. Their capacity for kindness in the face of those who had shown them none. Ambassador Kira Vance died 7 years after the summit, surrounded by friends from a dozen different species. Her final words, recorded for posterity, were simple. "We did it," she said. "We showed them who we really are." In the end, that was what humanity had wanted all along. Not power. Not domination. Not revenge. Just the chance to be seen for what they truly were. And in seeing them clearly, the galaxy finally understood what it meant to be human.